Hello, everyone. This is Judge Clutter at the Office of Tax Appeals. I just want to make sure that we have everyone here and that everyone can hear me. So I wanted to just check if Mr. Sakula is on the line, and if so, if you could unmute yourself and confirm. I see somebody in the chat named Frank, so that may be Mr. Sakula. Mr. Sakula, can you hear me? So at the bottom left of your screen there's an unmute button. And Mr. Sakul, I can now see that you're on video, or it looks like you're unmuted.
Okay, finally. It took me a long time.
Okay, I'm glad we figured it out. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. Before we go on the record, I just wanted to say welcome everyone. This is the Appeal of Advanced American Laboratories, and we're holding this hearing electronically with the agreement of all the parties today. Before we go on the record, there's just a housekeeping item. The parties held a pre-hearing conference for this case, and I issued minutes and orders. Pursuant to the orders, it set a deadline to submit additional evidence the 25th of February. And there are 5 additional pieces of documentation, and I'd just like to go over those briefly, and then Mr. School, I have a question for you in regards to that. So there was a proposed Exhibit 1 and 4, which was the opening arguments and the testimony. So those will be presented today, and so there's no need to have those as exhibits. That will be something that we take into the record as part of the hearing transcript. And the Exhibit 3 about the project descriptions, and also the exhibit submitted earlier today, it is part of the credit study, the 4-part test. So those are in the record already. The project descriptions or the new exhibit, those are, the new exhibit that was submitted, that is Exhibit A, the credit study, or you can refer to Exhibit 2, which is those project descriptions, but Exhibit A contains the project description. So for all of those exhibits, those are in the record. And then I also saw that there was an Exhibit 2, which was a check from the United States Treasury to appellant for the 2020 tax year. And I wanted to ask if you could please explain why that was submitted after the deadline.
Oh, I apologize. I did know there was a deadline in submitting it.
Okay, so let me turn to Franchise Tax Board. Franchise Tax Board, do you have any objection to that check from the U.S. Treasury that was submitted as Exhibit 2, I believe on March 10th?
Respondent doesn't take issue with that exhibit.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and admit that as Exhibit 3. So if there's any reference to that check or needs to be, that will be Exhibit 3. So let's go ahead and go on the record.
Sorry, Judge Claire, just for the record, but I guess we're not on the record yet, but for the unofficial record, Respondent, as you noted, this document was submitted past the deadline for
Mhm.
exhibits. While we don't take specific objection to the check itself, we do object on the grounds that it was submitted after the deadline. And frankly, we don't see any relevance to this document, you know, to the underlying issue of this appeal. So just so that is known. If the document is in, that's up to you guys, but just wanted to make sure that is communicated.
Okay, so just to be clear, you have that statement, but you have no objection to admitting it as an exhibit.
Well, we object on the ground that it is not timely. If it is admitted, if it is decided to be admitted, then I guess we would have no. Again, if you're asking if we object to the check itself, we don't see any issue with it. Again, I don't think it's relevant, but we do object to the timeliness of it.
Okay, so you do have an objection to the timeliness.
Yes.
So because I asked earlier and the answer was
Yeah, I
no.
apologize. I wanted to elaborate. I think Sophie was clarifying we don't object to the check itself. We don't have any
Okay.
issues in terms of like it not being authenticated, or we don't believe that it's accurate or anything like that. But we do object to the timeliness.
Okay, so sorry, I didn't understand that to
No
be the
problem.
case. So for the check, we will address that on when we go on the record. So I'm sorry that I, have mentioned that I didn't understand. So I will address that when we go on the record. So that the housekeeping item, regardless, we've covered that it was submitted late and that FTB objects to the timeliness. So now we can go on the record. I am Judge Kletter. With me are panel members Veronica Long and Hans von Mularo. This is the appeal of Advanced American Laboratories. It's OTA case number 2409-17392. Today is Thursday, March 12th, 2026, and the time is 2:43 p.m. Also present is our hearing reporter, Ms. Alonso, who is reporting this hearing verbatim. To ensure that we have an accurate record, we ask that everybody speaks one at a time and does not speak over each other. Please speak clearly and loudly. When needed, Ms. Alonso will stop the hearing process and ask for clarification. After the hearing, Ms. Alonso will produce the official hearing transcript, which will be available on the Office of Tax Appeals website. The hearing transcript and the video recording are part of the public record. This proceeding is a live broadcast, and any information shared on your screen is publicly viewable. And as a reminder, the Office of Tax Appeal is not a court. We are an independent appeals body. The Office of Tax Appeals is staffed by tax experts and is independent of the state's tax agencies. I ask that you please direct your arguments to the panel and please be respectful of one another during this hearing. And if there are any questions during this process, please feel free to stop me and direct any questions to me. Now, I would like for the parties to please identify themselves for the record and just state your name, and let's begin with appellant.
Patrick Michaels, CEO of Advanced American Laboratories, the appellant in this case.
Good afternoon. I am Sophie Keel, representation for the Franchise Tax Board.
And Nathan Hall on behalf of Respondent Franchise Tax Board.
And Mr. Sekula, could you please just state your name?
Yes. I'm Frank Sekula. I work for Business Incentive Solutions, and we had helped Mr. Michaels with his tax return, which includes the research tax credit.
Great. So the issue that we have for today is whether appellant has demonstrated that is engaged in qualified research under California Revenue and Taxation Code 23609, and if so, whether appellant has substantiated its qualified research expenses. With respect to the evidentiary record, Franchise Tax Board has provided exhibits A as in Apple through H as in Henry. Appellant did not object to those exhibits. Therefore, those exhibits are entered into the record. And appellant has provided exhibits 1 through 3. Franchise Tax Board did not object to the admissibility of exhibits 1 and 2, and therefore those are entered into the record. Now, Mr. Sekula, with respect to the exhibit 3, can I ask you what the purpose of submitting the IRS check
Just to
would be?
verify a statement, one of the complaints we have is that if of our 40 clients that have submitted that we've helped submit tax returns, virtually all of them have received their refunds from the IRS based on the exact same information that we'd sent to the FTB. The reason I know that our other clients have received money from the IRS is because we charge them for the service and they don't pay us unless they receive money for the IRS. So I wanted to just show that this is one of the checks that verify my statement that it's a major oddity that the IRS, based on a certain amount, based on the very specific, thorough information that Mr. Patrick has given, was accepted by the IRS, whereas the FTB rejects virtually every comment in his information. That seems very fine.
Thank you for that explanation. I think that there's no dispute that the IRS accepted the research and development credit. So I think based on what I've heard, we're going to go ahead and just have exhibits 1 and 2 in the record because it was not timely submitted. And, there was a deadline, and we did discuss this at the pre-hearing conference. I think ultimately, I appreciate what you've said, and we will take that into account, but not the exhibit. So
That's fine. You don't need the exhibit if you understand the concept.
So thank you. So for today, we have approximately 60 minutes. There will be 30 minutes for appellant's presentation, and that includes the testimony of Mr. Michaels. And I will go ahead and swear him in before Mr. Sekula, you begin your presentation. Then we'll have 20 minutes for Franchise Tax Board's presentation, and then we'll have 5 minutes for Mr. Sekula to provide any closing statement and rebuttal. At various points during the hearing, we may ask questions, and Franchise Tax Board may ask questions of the witness following their testimony. I will confirm with them. So, Mr. Michaels, if I could have you raise your right hand and ask you, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Great, thank you. Mr. Sekula, I will hand it over to you. You will have 30 minutes, and please begin when you are ready.
Thank you. I won't need 30 minutes. In this meeting, I believe that the OTA as an objective source will agree that American Advanced Lab provided valid research credit, tax credit information. I think you'll find when Mr. Michaels goes over the projects as well as the 4-part test, that he submitted very complete, very thorough, very comprehensive information that's quite easy to understand. Clearly, there could be questions on what he submitted, but the FTB generally takes the approach that they accept nothing from any client ever. Not one out of 100 tax returns that we've been submitting, the FTB has simply not accepted one argument from one client, and that just does not seem reasonable. Therefore, I want to also go through the opening arguments, which are a list of 9 complaints. The FTB started most of the exams in late 2024, but for Mr. Michaels' company, Advanced American Labs, they did start his a little earlier. They did start his in August of 23, but we're finding that the vast majority of the 40 clients that we have got their notices in 2024. So you could see the timeline here is really tough. You have a situation where they're asking a lot, sending as much as 14 IDRs. I'll correct though, for this, for Mr. Michaels, they only sent 7. But in any event, when you're talking about this kind of a time frame, to ask for a lot of more detailed information, it's simply not practical. And this is what their tact is, to ask for more and more and more information. Number one, they don't ask any real questions on the information that was submitted. It's important to note that we had submitted all this information with the original tax return. It wasn't after the fact. The brief that the FTB mentioned, they said this was submitted after the fact. That's not correct. This is all submitted with the return. We wouldn't submit a return without the backup. That's what we were paid for to do. So anyway, let's go to number 2. Number 2 says that this extensive documentation requirements is not proportional to Mr. Michael's request for $10,000 in 2019 and $11,000 in 2020. We spent, between my time and his time, a huge proportion of that responding to their countless requests for a fairly marginal credit. And we spent a lot of time and effort putting that credit together. Let's go to number 3, where we've already talked to number 3. Number 3 talks about denying everything. They denied, out of our 40 clients, they denied 5 clients that have flat out patents or applications of patents. That makes absolutely no sense whatsoever to deny patents for any reason, period, period, period. What they've done is they've eliminated the tax benefit that the legislatures have given. They've simply, by denying everything, have eliminated the credit. We have Senator Chuck Grassley from Iowa a couple months ago issued a video saying, please, taxpayers, we need you to submit these requests for tax credits because it's so important to get your business going, especially since this was a period of COVID. Companies needed to do certain things, and it's a great incentive in the law, and it's just not fair to eliminate the law. Number 4, virtually every client, they have pushed hard for this concept of initial hypothesis being accepted or rejected. Our clients are trying to make their business better. They don't spend time to know what their initial hypothesis was and how they had revised that hypothesis and how there could be 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 more hypotheses. They're wanting to get the job done. Number 5, we talked about COVID. Number 6, if I've gone through and done a lot of important work to make my company better and show clearly that I've made a major process improvement or technique to my company, that's the important thing. The important thing is that I've achieved that. Why would the FTB not ask, did these new improvements add to my, they don't ask, did they add to your business? Did they improve? Did you get new sales? Did you reduce your cost? No, they're not concerned at all about what the client did to improve his business. That's the only thing that's important. All this other stuff about uncertainty and hypotheses and documentation is 100% ancillary to the objective of getting a major process improvement or technique for the company. Number 7, how many times they reject, the FTB rejects and says, oh, you've done lots and lots of work, but it's mere implementation of existing technology. They're right. Yes, we did use the existing technology, but we did improve it. It's not mere. The word mere makes no sense. If you've implemented an important new concept to your company, you don't reject it because you did use some of the old parts of it. So that's just a nonsense argument that flies throughout all of our 40 clients. Number 8, with respect to the check, how does the taxpayer react to the fact that they submit 3 tax returns, the IRS submits the check without any question or any problem, but the IRS not only rejects it, they rejects any possible explanation given by the taxpayer. Very frustrating. Finally, our company works generally with companies that are $2 million or less. Mr. Michaels, I believe, is around the $2 million. He can clarify that in annual sales. These companies, as he's done, submit $10,000 or $20,000 for 3 years. They have $50,000 that the FTB wants them to pay back. Let's say they add another $10,000 in penalties and interest. They're going to ask these companies for $60,000, which may represent 2 years of their profits. When the company had every expectation that these credits would be approved, because number one, they had good information. Number two, as I did mention before, that for 15 years prior, they never asked for all this information. So how, if they're never asking for information, how do we pivot 180 degrees and ask for 7 to 15 pages of detail information that doesn't make any sense whatsoever to any of our taxpayers? So I think based on these facts, you could see our frustration. If anything I'm saying is incorrect, they should. I'm sure they'll correct me. But to the best of my knowledge, all these statements are 100% absolutely true, and that's what I have to say for now.
And Mr. Sukula, do you plan on having Mr. Michaels explain the project, or are you going to
Yes, I
ask him
think he
questions?
should. I think he should, because you take the situation again with that 4-part test. It's very complete and very thorough, showing what he did, but he can amplify it. And when you talk about artificial intelligence that he used, that's something everyone isn't familiar with. But it would seem absurd to say that there's no uncertainty with respect to using artificial intelligence. How did they make that? How can a taxpayer take that kind of abuse to say that there's no uncertainty in using artificial intelligence? So I definitely would like him to show that we're serious. We've done research here, and he said this is in principle. This isn't a huge amount of money to him, but he's a successful person. He wants to show you that he wasn't giving the FTB garbage. He was giving them good information, and we're very frustrated when they reject everything out of hand. Do you want to go ahead, Patrick?
I'm ready to speak, if that's okay.
Please go ahead.
I'd like to introduce myself first of all. I'm an environmental hygienist, registered environmental assessor with the state of California. I've been involved with environmental projects for over 40 years. And when I say environmental projects, my job is protecting people from toxigenic materials, carcinogens. I deal with things that hurt people. I'm a senior project scientist with the Navy and Marines. They have a program called the Other Environmental Liabilities Program. I have worked for the local air quality management districts. They have hired me independently to do investigations for them. I have a laboratory that is government accredited through the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They thoroughly audit me every 2 years to assure compliance with Bible-sized regulatory standards. That's who I am, and that's how I operate. I am a small business. At best, in the past, I've had 13 employees. Things change over time. I've been doing this 40 years as an independent businessman. And yes, I am below $2 million in the overall generation of income. And as an expert, I've been in 50 or 60 different cases. I make $500 an hour. So I'm not here for 10 or 11,000 or whatever. That's not why I pursued this. I pursued this because I, in good faith, submitted information and actually engaged in research specifically because I became aware that I could be reimbursed what would otherwise be total out-of-pocket costs. Because most of my research, if not all of it, at least during that time period, I put money out for. A microscope, for example, that is not standard. It is a microscope that operates by scanning at 400 magnification over a microscope slide. So you have moving parts, you have it taking photographs of, of biological entities, basically mold, spore, and funguses. And then I am looking at this after it scans the slides. And then I have to look at all of the pictures to train the AI. And I'm going to go backwards because right now AI is a big thing. And I'm not invested in AI. I was then only because I was involved with it. But at that time, we're talking 2019, 2020, AI was nascent. You did not have these big stock runs like you do now over it. And what most people don't understand about AI is somebody like me is behind the scenes training it. So I'm here looking at what the AI is viewing on the pictures that the microscope is taking and saying to the AI, yes, this is a cladosporium spore, or yes, this is a Stachybotrys spore, or no, you got it all wrong. And with the spores, for example, they have different life cycles, so they look different at different times. It does take somebody like me who analyzes under the microscope, and I am an expert in asbestos, and I'm an expert in mold, and I have done expertise with gases and other things. But it takes somebody, a human, to train these machines. And more often than not, at least during the time period when the AI was young, I was spending a lot of time, and I had assistants and I paid them to run the machines, but then I would have to go back and review everything. So whereas I might take a half hour to analyze a sample, now I'm having a machine do it. Then I'm going through the pictures that the machine takes and characterizes, and I'm saying, no, it's this, no, it's that, this is not at all. So it was a lot of work and it was a lot of money. And like I said, I think the scope I bought was somewhere between $15,000 and $20,000 just to do that. And I can't use it. It's not something that I can provide to the public a service with because it's untested, because I'm testing it. The advantage of it, however, would be, and it's like AI today, that, okay, I wouldn't have to train the analyst that I take 2 and 4 years to train. The computer is already trained. And I would merely have somebody prepare a slide and put it under the microscope. And then it would analyze it. And I would be assured, I would know by that point that it does its job as well or better than I do. And it's somewhat ironic at this point in time for me personally, because my mother's a breast cancer survivor, and I'm not bringing this up for sympathy. She was a professor at UCLA. My father was a DA for 26 years. She retired from CSUN, and she recently went to Kaiser and had a scan. And these scans are the same thing I was doing, but instead of a microscope, it was either using radiology or some other method. And she was cleared but they submitted the samples to the scans to AI. And they found that she had two growths that were not caught by the humans. And this is exactly what I was trying to do with the mold, make a more accurate method, because it is tedious to sit and look at particles under a microscope. And that is just with the mold, the AI intelligence with mold. And there are many parts to that. It's not just looking at the screens afterwards. That is one thing. The other thing I was utilizing and looking at was PCR analysis of the dust in my clients' houses. Now, I have clients who come to me as a detective, more or less, and say, my child or myself, we're having these problems and we think it's related to something environmental. And so I will go through the list and say, kind of like House or one of those movies or whatever, and say, what about this? What about that? What about the other thing? Well, one of the tools that I found was not being utilized as it can be was PCR DNA analysis of dust in people's residence for the biological mold spores and fungi that they're breathing. And so I introduced using this as a technique to determine the actual type of mold that they are exposed to, and then seeing if their what their experiences are relate to the mycotoxins within this mold. So, for example, I have a case right now, somebody in Beverly Hills paying $26,000 a month for a house that was not well maintained by the owners, began breathing, they believe, mold, saw some. I investigated. I went in, determined the types of mold in the dust by their DNA, and then I was able to correlate the specific types of mold that caused the infections that these people were experiencing, so that their doctors could then come in and do what they needed, either through IgE tests of the levels of response in their blood, or through urine test of the mycotoxins that they have within them. All of this, and then there's more, but I don't need that much time. You see where I'm going with this, as well as the using infrared to determine the extents of microbial growth within walls that you can't see with your own eyes. That's another thing that I applied for it here. So I spent this extra money. I bought this extra equipment, infrared meters, microscopes, paying for PCR DNA analysis that otherwise I would not have probably taken, because I knew that the research and development and the credit that was given to me will offset what otherwise could have been a loss, would have been a loss, and it is a loss at this point, that I might not have taken that risk if not for this. And the reason I started any of this, and I've been doing research all of my years. I mean, I was on the front page of the LA Times for disturbance of toxigenic materials in front of schools, in people's houses, and telling the people to get out, you're unsafe, don't take anything with you. I was in the daily news in the San Fernando Valley, California, for the same reasons. I was in the Ventura County Starfeed Press for schools that I went into and found some problems. And this is all research. This is not based upon existing laws and knowledge that we have. These are things I've had to put together. But then I found that when I talked to my CPA one day, what other things are out there for somebody in my field that might allow me to branch out and do more? And then my CPA told me, she said, look, there are research and development credits. And I said, wow, okay. I didn't know what the record keeping requirements were or not. Normally, my files are kept for 3 years, except for tax related items. So I get this response to my claim from the FTB a few years later. Then I put them in, and I'm like, oh my God, there's so much I could go through. There's so much I could get, but I'm dealing with all kinds of other things. And if I would have just known that they needed that form of documentation, the type that I use when I'm doing a investigation for the EPA or the AQMD, I would have done it. But I might not have even gone for the incentive if it was overburdensome, as this feels to me now. But I don't need the money, but that's no reason for me not to come here and say somebody should say something. So you can question me as you will, but that's where I'm coming from.
This is Judge Clutter. Thank you, Mr. Michaels. I just want to ask Mr. Sekula, did you have any questions that you wanted to ask of the witness before we turn it over to our panel questions and check with FDB if they have any questions for the witness?
No, I don't have questions for Mr. Michaels. That was a good presentation that he made.
Great. So I just have one confirming question for Mr. Michaels. What we have in the record is a credit study, and the credit study is addressed to Patrick Montoya. And I just wanted to confirm with you, is that like a typo? Is that someone else? Or who is Mr. Montoya?
So I have two names, basically, Patrick Michaels and Patrick Michaels Montoya. So yes, on my tax forms, you're going to see Montoya. My business literature is Patrick Michaels, and that's been consistent since 1984.
Noted. Thank you. I am going to actually turn it over to Franchise Tax Board and ask Franchise Tax Board, do you have any questions for Mr. Michaels?
We do not have any questions.
Okay, and then I'm going to turn it over to my panel. Judge Famularo, do you have any questions for Mr. Michaels?
I do. Hello, Mr. Michaels. Mr. Michaels, I have a question about the timeline that happened in this case. We're talking about amended returns that were filed for 2 years, and you mentioned that you were incentivized to conduct the projects at issue because of the research and development credits, but you filed amended returns for those credits. I was wondering if you could elaborate what you meant when you said that you might not have undertaken these projects but for the R&D credits.
So when I spoke with my CPA, she said to me, are you doing any type of research and development? And of course, we're talking 2 years here, right? So the initial year, I did not even know that I had any rights to any credits for my research and development. And so thus you have amended returns. And then the following year was not amended returns. But yes, I found that, yes, I can get research credits. Now, would I have gone as far as I did had I known about this prior? Probably not. If it was just a denial situation, there's no incentive for me to go further. I've always been a trailblazer in my field. I mean, with transmission electron microscopy, before anybody was using it for asbestos, and I'll explain that the difference with transmission electron microscopy is that we're looking at invisible particles to the naked eye. Most, for example, with asbestos, which is a carcinogen, most of the time with local regulatory agencies, if we see pieces of asbestos laying around, something we know as asbestos, then we call it contamination. You can see it with your eyes. Pieces of ducting or somebody's popcorn ceiling. But exposure can be to invisible amounts. That's why the airborne tests that we use for schools use TEM specifically. They're required to use TEM because you can see 30,000 magnification, seeing invisible particles floating in the air. So I took this and said, we can use this in the dust to see what the layer in the buildup is and try to correlate that to somebody's exposure. So like I said, I've always been a forward thinker in this field, and I utilize it in my practice as an expert with attorneys. But to incentivize me to do it on my own, within my own money, within my company, I saw this as an opportunity.
Okay, no, thank you, Mr. Michaels. I just want to clarify. So when you said that you spoke to your CPA about the R&D credits, is that in 1999? And specifically, around what, if you could give us a general estimate about what time that occurred, I think that might be helpful.
I know that I'm dealing with 2 tax years here, and this is way back for me. We're dealing with what, 2020 and 2019, right? Yeah. When the tax year that I learned of the credit for research and development was obviously the 2019. And when I learned there was such a thing, then I applied for it because I'm doing it. And in the following year, I even expanded it, thinking that, okay, great. It will open my horizons more. For example, on the side of the AI intelligence for mold, yes, I could make some money on that. I could make some money because it would not require an analyst. As we all know, that's the issue with AI now. It's going to replace somebody. But at the same time, I could also do more work. So I expanded once I knew that this research and development credit existed. I expanded my work, but I also took credit for what I was already doing, not even knowing that I had a credit that could come to me.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. So why was there a delay in pursuing the credit study that you used to establish the projects and the qualified research that you're taking the position supports the credit for each of the 5 projects listed in the credit study?
First of all, it's hard for me to remember that far back and the specifics. I went to my CPA. My CPA referred me to a company that specializes in this type of situation. And then I took the time to go through what I was already doing that was unique or not standard for our industry and put it together. It did take a long time to go through the paperwork I was presented and put all of the answers to the questions together, because I'm running a company at the same time that I'm trying to then I could not delegate this. I have nobody else. I'm a small business. At the time, 7 employees, I think, 4 maybe 7. At one time I had 13, but 7, maybe 4 of which are in the field, 3 of which are in the office, 1 of which is helping me in the lab. So I'm doing a lot of stuff, but getting the questionnaires and looking up, actually having to research the times where we worked on these things, that took a lot of effort and took a lot of time. So I don't remember the exact timeline there, but I do know it took a lot of effort and time just to put the package together. And then after I put the package together, it was reviewed and scrutinized by the company I hired, Business Incentive Solutions, to make sure that it's compliant. And if it wasn't compliant, I needed to know. But to my knowledge, everything was in compliance, and I felt good to go at that point.
So,
Can I
Mr.
clarify on the timeline? Can I clarify on the timeline?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think what happens here is our company, Business Incentive Solutions, when we went to him, he had already filled out the 2019 tax return. He was in the process of 2020, and we had to spend a lot of time talking to him about what he had done and make sure that we could submit this fairly extensive tax credit study. So by that time, again, he already had submitted 2021. So we were well into 2022, or sometime in 2021, I'm sorry, before we could get the stuff together to request the credit. So obviously it had to be an amended credit to go back. So he was hoping to get the credit as soon as he could, 2019 or 2020, but we couldn't actually put it together till 2021.
Okay, I appreciate the clarification. I have a separate question for you, Mr. Michaels. So, in the credit study for the methodology, it it mentions that the methodology is reliant on your oral testimony, and that you stated that you could support the testimony with contemporaneous documentation. And to my knowledge, in looking at the record, I don't see that contemporaneous documentation. And I wanted to provide you an opportunity to clarify what you meant by that and explain whether that information has been provided to respondent.
I was asked by Mr. Sekula to provide examples of the type of work I did. And I was able to provide examples of that work, but the examples are closer in timeline to now than 2019, because frankly, I just haven't been able to even go back. Like I said, normally we only keep our records, and this is part of our government accreditation as a lab as well. Our records are officially only kept for 3 years when it's non-financial related. So people's reports and surveys. So I rely upon them to maintain those, and then I can later state that, yes, I did produce those. But we don't have the means to store that much information to go back to 2019, 6 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever. It's really burdensome at this point.
What about emails, lab results, and other types of data that wouldn't involve your clients? Do you have that information? And is that something that your company maintains?
I would have, yes, I do have receipts for paying outside labs for the type of tests I'm talking about. I could provide those. However, a lot of the work I did was out of charge. I didn't charge clients for it. So, I mean, I have receipts for the microscope, for example, that I purchased. I provided information on payroll for the people who worked with me and for me. I'm just saying yes, I could dig up some things. It would take some time. And this, I was not aware I needed that for the purpose of this hearing. And so I've only provided some reports to Frank Sekulow that show the type of work I was describing in 2019 and 2020 that I continue it on now after starting it back then, except for the AI. I have to say, except for the AI with the microscope, that turned out eventually to not be adequately accurate for me to utilize on a daily basis. So I had to shelve it for the time. Probably now it would be a much better situation because of how far AI has come. But at that time, with for example, the readers of license plates and faces and all that. We're so far advanced from 2019 when I was doing this over particles and fungal spores that it probably would work now, but I don't have the extra funds nor the incentive to jump back in and try to make it work.
Judge, can I clarify again? Judge,
Sure. Yes, please go ahead.
the comment we had made is because all this contemporaneous information had not been required for 15 years or longer, we didn't take the time or effort to do it. And even if we would, when you have 3 or 4 or 5 years go by, you're not going to have things. It's very difficult. I can't find stuff from 1 year ago, let alone 5 or 6 years ago, even if I would have gotten them. Now, you could argue we maybe didn't do as good a job on that, but the research that he did is very, very clear, as he's explaining to you in spades, very, very clear research. And that's the key, is there's no doubt that he did the research. As I mentioned before, it's ancillary, the documentation. And what if he didn't have documents? What if he didn't have emails? Now, would you accept the receipts for the microscope that he used in the research? Would you accept that, the microscope receipt?
So, I mean, with respect to, any type of documentation like that, it's something that I can't advise you right now
Right.
that whether that's something you should provide and is something that meets the requirements of the law. But in general, I can tell you that any kind of documentation, contemporaneous documentation, including purchase of equipment, during the purchase of equipment in those 2 years in 1999 and 2000 would generally be relevant.
So I'm sorry we didn't submit those. But again, I've been repeating myself for about the 4th or 5th time. If it hasn't been asked for 15 years, why would you not assume that when you give reports that are crystal clear, that they would need to be supplemented by all this contemporaneous information? Yeah, after the fact, you could say, yeah, you should have done it. But put yourself in our shoes. We're not being asked for this stuff. And there's 180 degrees change for no reason. No one's ever alerted us that we do this. The IRS hasn't asked for it. Now, this is hammered over our head that we can't approve any of our clients' requests. Was you could see how absolutely in tune he was to responding to the spirit and the intent of the law. And now the FTB is going to deny everybody because of the documents that are 5 or 6 or 7 years old. That does not seem equitable.
I'd like to make a clarification, if you don't mind.
Yes, go ahead.
In a single year, my lab would analyze maybe 2,000 sets of, for example, mold samples. Okay. And a set is not one, it can be, but it's usually 2, 7, 10 samples. And not all of those were involved in my research and my work. And that becomes a problem to go through all of those sets and say, this one was for this and this one was for that. It also is the same case when it goes to the PCR on projects. Not every project that I did, and we're talking hundreds that I do a year, maybe thousands projects, me and my employees, where mold is involved, not all have PCR involved. Sometimes, for example, I use PCR DNA analysis for a certain type of mold that's called a house-eating fungus. It cannot be identified by spore types or even by most people the way it looks. I happen to be one of the few people who can identify it by field observations. But when I need it for legal purposes, I have to take a piece of that mold and send it in for DNA analysis to tell me that is pariah, the wood-eating mold, the house-eating fungus. So the other issue here is that the number of projects during these years for me to go back and sort through, it becomes very even more burdensome, because yes, it's not just like I have a explicit list of this one here and that one there and this one. I would have to go through digging back, and it's overly burdensome if you ask me for what we're doing here. If I knew to begin with, that would have been different. I would have kept an exact log like I do for my governmental work, but I provided everything I thought I needed to the government for this purpose. But I just wanted to clarify, there's a lot of work I do, a lot of work my company does, and specifically me when it comes to the more identification, because I hold the licenses, I hold the certs. Most people can't go out and do what I do without my licenses. And the people who work under me, most of them cannot do what they do under me without my license, because I have to oversee them. So there are thousands of projects that we're talking about here. That's why when I'm thinking about, oh, can I give you something contemporaneous? Yes, it take a lot of work now to go back and do that for you.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. And Mr. Michaels, I just wanted to ask one more clarifying question about your initial testimony. One of the requirements for the research credit is an elimination of uncertainty regarding the development of development or improvement of a product. And I heard you speak about the issues and the need to conduct these projects generally. I wanted to ask you if you could, by each specific research project, identify what specifically you identified as the uncertainty that needed to be eliminated in the process to develop or improve those projects.
Okay, so let's take the AI and mold. The studies, the research exists that show that taking the same sample for mold analysis and providing it to different labs and seeing their results has a wide range of difference between lab to lab. Taking the same sample and providing it to the same analyst on separate occasions also has a wide differentiation in their findings. There are a lot of reasons for that. I mean, I thought my testimony was going to be about 30 minutes, but I could turn it into 6 hours. But there's a wide difference in analysis, especially of mold spores. So there's a great uncertainty between analysts, unless, and this is the only unless there's an extreme finding. For example, if you have a sample where there's 10,000 spores per cubic meter of a certain type of mold, a couple spores difference is not a big deal. But when we're talking about one analyst saying, oh, I saw 30 spores of this type, and another one saying I saw 300, that can be a big difference. And I was hoping to train the AI to take that differentiation out, because I think it has the capabilities of some of the things that humans fail at, that it would be able to take that into account. That's one. On the TEM side, the dust particle analysis for contamination and asbestos, you have a situation here where somebody lives next to a freeway. And most people don't know, but asbestos is not yet banned. It's not fully banned. There are a lot of uses. One is clutches, brakes, so mechanical means. And so you have somebody who is claiming contamination in their house, but yet they're next to a freeway. Using TEM, I need to know how to differentiate that. As a matter of fact, what I was working on was using the TEM method as a fingerprint for asbestos, because the way TEM works is they take a sample, they put it under a transmission electron microscope, which goes up to 30,000 magnification. It's in a vacuum. They shoot electrons at it, and they come up with a scattered area electron display. Then they shoot X-rays at it, which gives an X-ray diffraction reading. And what that tells you is two things. One, what is the crystal structure? Two, what is the chemical makeup of that asbestos fiber? And I was working on trying to match, like a fingerprint, the chemical and crystal structure of that fiber with the known asbestos materials in the house. So when it comes to the asbestos side of things, so that, okay, that contamination is actually from inside the house, not from the freeway next door. Or if there was an event next door, maybe someone broke their house down and disturbed asbestos, I could take a piece of that and match it with using TEM, the SAED, and the XRF on that, right? So these are uncertainties I'm trying to solve. When it comes to the infrared, one of the biggest issue is I'm looking at a wall and I can't see through it. So I use these other methods to see something that can distinguish something in the wall. So using an infrared, I'm going to see, all right, why is that portion of the wall wetter than the next portion of the wall? It allows me to then say, okay, maybe locate a source from which intrusion of moisture causing fungal growth is coming in, or it allows me to see how extensive is this fungal intrusion, because this wall is still wet after such and such time from an event, okay? So when it comes to the measures of uncertainty, that's, in a summary, what I was saying in my documentation that I was working on. And I'm further along, but I'm not done. There's still more work to do.
Okay, I appreciate that. You mentioned 3 of the 5 projects. I think there are 2 remaining. One is, and you briefly mentioned earlier, the microscope platform, the X Rapid Group hands-free microscope platform, and then the last one being the polymerase chain reaction testing, the 5th project.
Okay, so let's go to the PCR. That's where I was talking about taking the dust in the house and checking the DNA of the fungal spores within that dust. And the uncertainty of that is this: we are exposed to mold all day, every day to some extent. We don't know which of the 30 different types of cladosporium or Aspergillus penicillium you're breathing out there in the natural environment. So what we can do is compare. The uncertainty is, what is the mold that's coming from outside the house? And what is the mold that's being found inside the house? And that comes down to speciating the mold, because Stachybotrys, for example, is called a black mold. It's a type of mold that produces a mycotoxin that's similar to chemical warfare agents that we have produced in the past. People breathe it. The theory is that they breathe it, it dissolves in their lungs and then releases this poison into their lungs and causes debilitating diseases. And I have clients who have these diseases, but there's more than one type of Stachybotrys. In that case, it's pretty straightforward. But when it comes to cladosporium, it is allergenic in all cases, but mostly innocuous for producing toxins, but there are a couple types of cladosporium that do produce mycotoxins. And that's relevant to somebody in their house to see if the event that occurred in their house that they think is affecting them, if those mycotoxins, that type of cladosporium is present, not the type that's outside that's degrading your vegetation so it turns into fertilizer. So to take away that uncertainty, we would use the PCR method. And I've already explained when it comes to the microscope why there's a difference. There's the uncertainty in the analysis based upon lab to lab and analyst to analyst, that if we had a adequate AI situation, just like my AI on my computer reads my face, facial recognition. Mold spores analysis are based upon morphology, which is exactly what we're talking about with facial recognition. We're talking about different points that are unique to different mold spores. I'll give you an example that I give to clients. Aspergillus and penicillium, we report them the same under standard tests because we cannot look at them and see the difference. Both of them look like a clear marble. They look like a bubble. That's what they look like, exactly like a round bubble. Some of them are a little browner colored, some are clear, but they all look the same shape and they have variations in color. But if I want to tell somebody this is aspergillus and this is penicillin, which is the same as penicillin that we have as a bacterial fighter, I need to be able to do a test that could say it's this kind of aspergillus, it's this kind of penicillium we're working with here. And nothing but the PCR can do that. So these are the uncertainties that what I'm working with are trying to solve.
Thank you, Mr. Michaels. I have no further questions.
This is Judge Cutter. I'm going to turn it over to Judge Long. Judge Long, do you have any questions for appellant or the witness?
I have no questions, thank you.
Okay, so I am going to actually turn it over to Franchise Tax Board. Franchise Tax Board, you'll have 20 minutes for your presentation. And if I could just ask you if you make any citations to law, if you could please spell out the names to help our hearing reporter. That was the attempt of my order to ask for proper names. Just please spell it out to aid in transcription the first time that you mention it. So you'll have 20 minutes. Ms. Kuhl, are you ready to begin?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Good afternoon. For its 2019 and 2020 taxable years, appellant claims to have engaged in research qualifying for the California Research Credit. Just to clarify the timeline for the panel, appellant's original 2020 California tax return was filed on May 11th, 2021, and appellant did not claim the research credit. We would be happy to provide a copy if needed. Appellant filed California amended returns in June of 2022 for taxable years 2019 and 2020, claiming California research credit. However, appellant has failed to provide sufficient evidence to substantiate its claimed research credit. Under Internal Revenue Code Section 41, taxpayers must establish three primary elements. First, taxpayers must substantiate that they performed qualified research activity. After demonstrating that they engaged in qualified activity, taxpayers must substantiate the expenses related to such qualified activity. Finally, taxpayers must substantiate their fixed base percentage and base amount for computing the proper amount of credit. If taxpayers fail to establish any of these elements, they are not entitled to the credit. With respect to qualified research activity, Section 41D defines qualified research as research activity which meets four distinct tests. First, expenditures connected with the purported research activities must qualify as research or experimental expenditures under Internal Revenue Code Section 174. Second, the research must be undertaken to discover information that is technological in nature. Third, the research must be intended to discover information that is useful in the development of a new or improved business component. And finally, the taxpayers must show that at least 80% of the claimed activity involved a process of experimentation for a qualified purpose. Failure to establish any of these four elements also results in a taxpayer's failure to claim any credit. At its core, this case is about substantiation. A taxpayer claiming a credit under Section 41 must retain records in sufficiently useful form and detail to substantiate that the expenditures claimed are eligible for the credit. Here, appellant has provided no documentation substantiating that it actually engaged in the activities that it claims to have performed. Appellant's failure to substantiate its activities is dispositive of this appeal. Nonetheless, appellant's claims fail for several other reasons. Appellant has failed the four-part test. Appellant has also failed to substantiate its purported research expenses and has further failed to establish a nexus between purported research expenditures and the claimed activity. Finally, appellant has failed to provide documentation establishing that it properly computed its fixed base percentage and base amount for computing the credit. To satisfy Part 1 of the four-part test under Internal Revenue Code Section 174, the research activity must be research and development in the laboratory sense, such that 1. An uncertainty exists, and 2. The activity is intended to discover information that would eliminate this uncertainty. To establish uncertainty, the taxpayer must show that information available to it did not 1. Indicate that the taxpayer was capable of developing or improving the product. 2. Establish the method by which the taxpayer would develop or improve the product. Or 3. Establish the appropriate design of the product. If the taxpayer establishes that uncertainty existed, the taxpayer then must show that it undertook investigative activities to discover information intended to eliminate the uncertainty. Appellant does not cite to or analyze any evidence to substantiate that any of its claimed projects satisfy the Section 174 test. In Betz versus Commissioner, spelled B-E-T-Z versus Commissioner, the U.S. Tax Court analyzed whether a taxpayer's design of certain machinery satisfied the Section 174 test. The taxpayer in that case provided copies of proposed designs, purchase orders, drawings, and other underlying documentation, which the court analyzed in holding that the taxpayer had not satisfied the Section 174 test. Here, by contrast, there is no way to even begin to evaluate whether appellant has satisfied the Section 174 test because appellant has failed to provide any relevant underlying documentation that could be analyzed. Appellant's credit study by itself does not establish any qualified activity. It merely contains unsubstantiated assertions. Appellant has simply not met its burden. As set forth in the applicable code and regulations, appellants must provide actual documentation that establishes qualified activity. The taxpayer's requirement to provide documentation substantiating its claimed research credits has been affirmed by the OTA in several cases, including Appeal of Pino, spelled P-I-N-O, and Appeal of First Solar, spelled F-I-R-S-T space S-O-L-A-R, and several others. The applicable authorities on both the state and federal level are overwhelmingly clear. Appellants must substantiate their activities through documentation. Simply alleging that they performed certain activities is insufficient to show entitlement to the research credit. Appellant has failed to establish that it satisfied the Section 174 test with respect to all 5 of its claims projects. To satisfy Part 2 of the 4-part test, the taxpayer must establish that research was undertaken for the purpose of discovering information that is technological in nature. Information is technological in nature if it fundamentally relies on principles of the physical or biological sciences, engineering, or computer sciences. The fact that technology occurred in the background of the operations does not satisfy the technological in nature test. Appellant has failed to provide any relevant underlying documentation which shows that any qualified research activity was undertaken by appellant in taxable years 2019 and 2020. Without such evidence, respondent cannot evaluate whether that research was undertaken for the purpose of discovering information that is technological in nature. As stated before, appellants must substantiate their activities through documentation. Appellant's credit study by itself does not establish any qualified activity. It merely contains unsubstantiated assertions. To satisfy Part 3 of the 4-part test, the taxpayer must establish that the research is useful in the development of a new or improved business component of the taxpayer. Activities related to the adaptation or duplication of an existing business component are not qualified research for purposes of the credit. Taxpayers must identify all discrete business components upon which qualified research is performed. Appellant has failed to identify a singular business component within each of its alleged projects. A business component is defined as a product, process, software, technique, formula, or invention, and the statute and regulations contemplate application of the 4-part test to a single component, not a conglomeration of components. Appellant fails to identify discrete components for each so-called project. For example, in Project 1, appellant alleges that it, quote, implemented unique techniques, and for Project 2, appellant alleges that it implemented, quote, state-of-the-art systems. Appellant fails to identify how many techniques or systems there were, or precisely what each alleged technique or system encompassed. For Project 3, appellant describes that they, quote, researched numerous alternatives, tested and implemented new unique process and procedures. On its face, process and procedures appears to potentially encompass both an alleged process and a method. In fact, all of appellant's project descriptions appear to encompass potentially multiple business components. Furthermore, inserting buzzwords like researched and alternatives and tested does not constitute evidence of such activity. Without substantiation, it is impossible to determine precisely what the business components were and whether any activities related to such components satisfy the remaining tests for qualified activity. Appellant has failed the business component test. To satisfy the 4th part of the 4-part test, the taxpayer must establish that substantially all, or 80%, of its research activities with respect to the business component constitute elements of a process of experimentation for a qualified purpose. A process of experimentation has been interpreted to mean that the taxpayer develops a hypothesis for how a new alternative may develop a new business component, tests that hypothesis in a scientific manner, analyzes the results, and then refines the hypothesis or discards it and develops a new hypothesis. A qualified purpose is a purpose relating to a new or improved function, performance, reliability, or quality. In Appeal of Pino, spelled P-I-N-O, the taxpayer used broad and conclusory language to describe their process of experimentation and did not provide sufficient evidence to substantiate their claim. In its opinion, the Office of Tax Appeals correctly held that merely stating the existence of an evaluative process does not show that the taxpayer actually engaged in that process, or that if the process occurred, it was a qualified process of experimentation under the law. Similar to the other tests for a qualified activity, appellant has not substantiated any of its research activities with underlying documents. Appellant has only provided a credit study, which uses overbroad language to generally assert that it performed testing and research. Without underlying documentation, neither respondent nor this panel can analyze whether substantially all of appellant's claimed research activities with respect to a business component constitute elements of a process of experimentation for a qualified purpose. As such, respondent's determination should stand. I am happy to answer any questions at this time.
This is Judge Clutter. Thank you, Ms. School. I do not have any questions, so I'm going to just briefly check with my panel before turning it over to Mr. Sekula. So, Judge Famularo, do you have any questions for Franchise Tax Board?
No, I do not. Thank you.
And Judge Long, do you have any questions for Franchise Tax Board?
I have no questions. Thank you.
Okay, so since there are no questions, Mr. Sekula, you will have 5 minutes to make a final statement, rebut anything that Franchise Tax Board raised, or if there's anything else that you said or prepared, this is your time. Are you ready, or do you have anything that you wish to add? Oh, I'm sorry, I think you may be muted.
Okay.
Please begin.
Yeah. If you take a look at the regulations in a fairly simple manner for any taxpayer, if you Google what's required, if you take a look at how to apply for these credits through any service like ours, you don't get this series of 20 or 30 or 40 really specific, really hard things to document and to prove and to go through her big laundry list. I'm not sure Google or any major company could qualify for the California tax credit. It's amazingly overwhelming, and to say that we're just using buzzwords and to say there's no business component when you're doing this sophisticated testing, it's just so frustrating when they slam the door and hit you with just an incredible amount of standards that would just be what she just listed. Who could ever submit this? And would they buy for $10,000? Would they spend 3 or 4 weeks trying to answer piece by piece by piece what she was asking for? Is certainly overwhelming and certainly unreasonable. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Sekula. I'm just going to check one last time with my co-panelists. Judge Famularo, do you have any questions for either of the parties?
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
And Judge Long?
I will ask one question, and this goes for appellants. So I'm curious, when you're referring to the regulations, is there a specific regulation that you're referring to, or is it just the regulations to the Internal Revenue Code in general?
Is this to me?
Yes, please.
I'm sorry. I'm saying that when people are sitting down to apply for the credit, would they have any hope of realizing that they would be expected to meet 20 or 30 harsh standards like this? Why would a taxpayer, $2 million taxpayer, ever attempt to submit anything to the FTB? Clearly, it would take them so much time and effort to try to explain at 80%, and then this initial hypothesis. No one would expect to have to do that. It's amazing what she went through. She went through point after point. Everything is wrong. The client did nothing. He made a good faith effort. He's given you very specific, really detailed, specific things about how his work involved incredible uncertainty and very specific examples of how this testing was done by purchasing microscopes and doing everything. And the FTB says every single thing is wrong. I mean, it makes no sense for any client ever to submit a tax credit to the FTB. You would never win.
All right,
They
thank you.
shut the door. They shut the door.
That concludes my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I would like to thank the parties for their presentations today. This concludes our hearing. The panel will meet and decide this case based on the documentation that's in the record and the testimony that was presented today, considering your arguments. We will issue our written decision no later than 100 days from today. The case is submitted and the record is now closed. And that concludes, I believe that concludes this hearing session. So thank you everyone for your time and have a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.